I see that we have a question in the Q&A. So I'm gonna look at get this question. So it says, I have a story that reasonable accommodation is another so-called barrier to entry, i.e., oh great, now I have to go find specialized equipment, stations, etc. How do you suggest we dismantle that negative connotation?
That's a really, really great question. One thing that corporate America does very frequently is create the talent with the disability coming in almost an adversarial way, right? So when we're thinking about reducing risk, when we're thinking about all of these kind of how do we get someone to work, we have to humanize that process, right? We have to humanize the way that we think about people. When you're getting someone set up to onboard, to doing that first day of job, you go through a checklist. And switching our cultural mindset to a reasonable accommodation is just another one of those onboarding pieces that every one of us should be going through every single time, will go a long way in changing it, because again, we normalize it as a part of our process. We don't, it's not an additional headache or an additional thing that we have to do. And so that's kind of the first thing that you can do. And as little as that seems, if you've got a new recruiter or a new hiring manager that's coming in and they go, oh, okay, reasonable accommodations, it's already on the list. Okay, I know how to do that. That makes a lot of difference. And if you have a strong accommodation system within your organization, making sure, and I, however you guys can impact that managers are always aware of how to request an accommodation or how to support a new employee with an accommodation, because it's amazing to me, like I would say 95%, maybe more percent of the time I go in and I talk to hiring managers or corporate leaders, I would say, okay, well, tell me about your accommodations process. And then like, oh, I think we have one. And because it's so stuck kind of over in legal and risk management, it isn't something that's trained on for managers and recruiters and that kind of thing. And so I think that just sort of normalization goes a long, long way. And we've had some other companies do great things in terms of they build a little, I'll call it library, but a small inventory of accessible equipment on a site so that they always have things on hand. And that way they're making it easier on the onboarding process, on the hiring manager. And really people with disabilities also know a lot of times what we need. So it's also okay to ask, right? If Julie, if you need this, tell me how that can work for you, or tell me how to make this work for you. And we know that we can't always have the Mercedes of accommodations, but we can give you some guidance as leaders about what that accommodation could be and how we've been successful in the past. And the last thing to keep in mind with accommodations is that there are not that many of them that are expensive. And a lot of them are very, very simple ways of managing people or managing schedules that we already do anyway. I always equate it to, I used to be a single parent. And when I had other single parents that worked for me, I was very empathetic because I know you've got to get the kid here, you've got to do this, you got to do this. And reasonable accommodations really are a lot the same way. They can function in the same way if we just start to think about it as, how do I help this person on my team or who's joining our team have the best experience and be the most productive to help lift up all of us? It's really a mindset thing. I think it's such a great point.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that. That comes up. Those are questions that's so common. People think, oh, it's too hard for me to do this, and those are some great points that you've made.